The sun begins its slow descent over the western hills of the Kyoto basin, casting long amber shadows across the wide avenues of Heian Court, the city of peace and tranquility. It is the 11th century, a time when the world feels both vast and intimately small, contained within the lacquered gates of the imperial palace. Here the air is thick with the scent of plum blossoms and the earthy, sweet fragrance of ginkgo wood incense, drifting through the corridors like a memory. We find ourselves in a world where time is measured not by the ticking of a clock, but by the changing hue of the maple leaves and the steady, rhythmic chirping of crickets in the tall grasses. To understand this world, one must first understand the concept of miyabi, a word that translates poorly into our modern tongue, but suggests a profound, courtly refinement. It is the pursuit of beauty in every gesture, the ability to find a deep, melancholy joy in the fleeting nature of all things. In the Heian Court, a person's worth is not found in their deeds of war or their accumulation of gold, but in the elegance of their calligraphy, the way they layer the colors of their silk robes to match the season, and most importantly, their mastery of poetry. A single verse, written on paper scented with sandalwood and tied to a flowering branch, could begin a lifelong romance or mend a broken heart. The physical heart of this world is the Daidairi, the great palace enclosure, a city within a city, where the emperor resides as a living deity. The layout is a masterpiece of symmetry and intentionality, with long open-air corridors known as watarodo, connecting the various pavilions. These wooden walkways allow the aristocrats to move through the palace without ever touching the earth, their silken trains sweeping softly against the polished cypress floors. As you walk through these halls in your mind's eye, you notice how the gardens are designed to bring the wilderness into the home. There are miniature lakes where dragon-headed boats glide silently during festivals, and carefully placed rocks that represent distant sacred mountains. Each garden is a living painting, shifting from the delicate pinks of spring to the stark, haunting white of a winter morning. As you settle into your blankets tonight and prepare for sleep, perhaps you can imagine yourself resting in one of these quiet, dim chambers. You are in exactly the right place to let the weight of the day fall away. Here at the Slumber Archives, we bring you new journeys through history every single day, weaving stories of the past to help you find peace in the present. If you enjoy these nightly travels, please do consider subscribing so you can join us for every new tale, and perhaps leave a like to help others find their way to our quiet corner of the world. For now, let us return to the soft glow of the Heian night. In the inner chambers of the palace, the light of the sun rarely reaches the deepest rooms. Instead, the world is illuminated by the flickering golden glow of oil lamps and beeswax candles, casting dancing shadows against the painted silk screens. These screens, known as shoji and byobu, serve as the only walls, creating a sense of fluid, breathing space where a whisper in one room might be carried by a breeze into the next. The atmosphere is one of profound intimacy and mystery. Behind these screens, the court ladies live in a world of perpetual twilight, their faces powdered white, their teeth blackened in the fashion of the day to resemble a dark, lacquered void, and their hair flowing in long, shimmering rivers of black silk that trail behind them for several feet. The silence of the palace is never absolute. It is a tapestry of soft sounds. There is the rustle of the junihito, the 12-layered ceremonial robes worn by the noblewomen. Each layer is a slightly different shade, carefully chosen to create a gradient of color at the sleeves and hem that mimics the petals of a flower or the transition of the sky at dusk. To wear these robes is to become a walking work of art, a heavy and beautiful burden that dictates a slow, graceful pace of life. You can hear the faint, metallic clink of a silver charcoal brazier being moved, and the distant, melodic plucking of a koto, its strings vibrating with a resonance that seems to hum in the very bones of the building. In this environment, the written word is the soul's primary currency. Because the men and women of the court are often separated by screens and social protocols, they communicate through a constant exchange of notes. A messenger might arrive at a lady's veranda bearing a poem composed in the delicate, flowing hiragana script, a script so graceful it was known as the women's hand. The recipient would examine the quality of the paper, the scent of the ink, and the choice of imagery before composing a reply that matched the tone and rhythm of the original. This constant flow of poetry created a shared emotional landscape, where a collective sigh over the falling of a cherry blossom was considered the highest form of sophistication. As the years passed in the Heian Court, this dedication to aesthetics reached its zenith. It was a world that felt permanent in its traditions, yet was acutely aware of its own fragility. The courtiers knew that the palace eaves would eventually rot, that the silken robes would fray, and that the power of the great clans would one day wane. This awareness gave birth to no-aware, the pathos of things. It is the sweet sadness felt when watching a sunset, knowing that its beauty exists only because it is ending. Imagine the scent of the air once more. It is cool and damp with the evening mist rising from the Kamo River. The heavy scent of incense has settled into the wood of the pillars, and the sound of a distant temple bell marks the passing of the hour. In the private quarters of a lady-in-waiting, a small writing desk is set out. There is an inkstone, a fine brush, and a stack of paper. It is here, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, that the greatest literature of the age is born. The flickering candlelight catches the edge of a lacquer box, and the world outside the palace gates seems to vanish entirely, leaving only the brushstrokes and the thoughts of a woman observing the world with a keen, quiet eye. The twilight of the Heian Court was not a time of darkness, but a time of filtered, exquisite light. It was a period where the human heart was explored with a precision that had never been seen before. As we prepare to look closer at the life of the woman who would define this era, Lady Murasaki Shikibu, we must first allow ourselves to sink into this atmosphere of silk and shadow, to feel the stillness of the palace at night, and to understand that in this world of the shining prince, beauty was the only truth that mattered. The gardens are quiet now. The herons have returned to their nests among the reeds, and the heavy silk curtains have been drawn shut against the night air. In the stillness of the city of peace, the story is only just beginning to unfold, drifting through the corridors like the scent of a fading blossom, carried on a wind that smells of ancient woods and the coming rain. To understand the woman who would one day paint the world in shades of violet and gold, we must travel back through the mist to a time when she was known not as Murasaki, but simply as the daughter of Fujiwara no Tametoki. She was born into the middle ranks of the aristocracy, a world of refined expectations and subtle boundaries, where one's lineage determined the height of the pillars in one's home and the number of layers in one's robes. Her family belonged to a lesser branch of the great Fujiwara clan, the powerful architects of the Heian Court. But while her father lacked the immense political weight of his distant cousins, he possessed a wealth of a different kind, a deep, abiding love for the brush and the scroll. In the quiet rooms of her childhood home, the air was often thick with the scent of ground ink and the soft rustle of mulberry paper. Her father was a scholar of the Chinese classics, a man who found more solace in the ancient poems of the Tang dynasty than in the frantic maneuvering of the imperial palace. It was in this atmosphere of quiet contemplation that the young girl began to observe the world. She watched the way the light shifted across the veranda, and she listened to the rhythmic chanting of sutras that drifted from the nearby temples. In those days, the education of a young woman was strictly defined. She was expected to master the graceful flowing script of the Japanese kana, to learn the delicate art of fragrance mixing, and to understand the complex etiquette of silk and ceremony. The world of Chinese characters, the rugged, complex kanji used for government, philosophy, and history, was considered the exclusive domain of men. It was thought too harsh, too intellectual for the feminine spirit. Yet, as her brother sat with their father to learn these forbidden strokes, the young girl sat nearby, ostensibly occupied with her sewing or her music. She listened with a sharpness that defied the conventions of her time, as her brother struggled to memorize the difficult passages of the Confucian classics. She found the meanings blooming in her mind like wildflowers. She absorbed the history of distant empires and the philosophical musings of ancient sages simply by being present in the room. It is said that her father, noticing her effortless mastery, once remarked with a heavy sigh that it was a great pity she had not been born a man, for her intellect was a rare and luminous thing. One can imagine her sitting there, eyes cast down in practiced modesty, while her mind roamed through the high mountain passes and moonlit rivers of Chinese poetry. A secret world she carried within her, hidden beneath the many-layered sleeves of her silk kimono. And so she grew into a woman of profound interiority, a scholar in a world that expected only a decorative presence. This unconventional education gave her a unique lens through which to view the courtly life that awaited her. She saw the artifice and the ambition, but she also saw the deep, aching humanity that lay beneath the ceremony. She understood that even the most powerful lords were subject to the same fleeting joys and enduring sorrows as the commonest monk. As the years passed, the season of her youth began to transition into the more somber tones of adulthood. In her early 20s, a somewhat late age for the time, she was married to a distant kinsman named Fujiwara no Nobutaka. He was a man much older than she, a widower with several children, and a reputation for a certain flamboyant confidence. It was a marriage of quiet stability rather than the dizzying poetic romances she would later describe in her writing. They lived together in a house filled with the soft sounds of domestic life, away from the glittering distractions of the capital's centre. For a few brief years, the world seemed to settle into a gentle rhythm. She gave birth to a daughter, and the days were filled with the small, essential tasks of motherhood and the quiet companionship of a husband who respected her mind. There was a peace in those years, a sense of being sheltered from the storms of the wider world. But the Heian period was a time as fragile as a cherry blossom in a spring gale. Disease and sudden misfortune were constant shadows, even for those of noble birth. After only 2 years of marriage, a plague swept through the city, and Nobutaka was taken by the fever. Suddenly the quiet walls of her home felt vast and echoing. The widowhood that followed was a period of profound stillness and deep grey grief. She retreated further into herself, finding that the only colours left in her world were the ones she could create with her brush. In the long, lonely nights, she began to write. Perhaps as a way to process her loss, or perhaps to build a world where beauty could endure even when life faded away. She spent her days looking out at her garden, watching the seasons change with a heavy heart. She saw the plum blossoms fall like snow in the early spring, and she watched the evening mist settle over the hills of Kyoto, turning the world into a landscape of ink and shadows. It was during these years of solitude that the seeds of her great masterpiece began to take root in the fertile soil of her sorrow. She began to imagine a prince, a man of impossible grace and beauty, who moved through a world of moonlight and music, seeking a connection that could transcend the fleeting nature of existence. As she brushed the first characters of what would become the story of the Shining Prince, she was not merely writing a romance. She was weaving together all the fragments of her life, She was using the Chinese logic she had learned in secret, the poetic sensibility of her father's house, and the deep, lived understanding of grief that now resided in her bones. The ink flowed across the paper like a river, carrying her away from the silence of her widowhood and back toward the vibrant, complicated heart of the imperial court. Word of her writing began to spread, whispered from one screened veranda to the next. In a society that prized literary skill above almost all else, her talent was a beacon that could not be ignored. The quiet widow, the daughter of a mid-level scholar, was beginning to create a world so vivid and so true that it threatened to eclipse reality itself. And as the ink dried on those early chapters, the path was being cleared for her to enter the very center of the Heian world, a place of golden screens and whispered secrets where her life would change forever. The transition from the quiet solitude of her home to the vibrant, pressurized atmosphere of the imperial palace was one of profound significance for Murasaki Shikibu. Around the year 1005, she was summoned to serve as a lady-in-waiting to Empress Shoshi, the daughter of the most powerful man in Japan, Fujiwara no Michinaga. It was a world of immense beauty, where the air was thick with the scent of blended incense and the rustle of heavy silk, yet it was also a place of sharp edges and unspoken expectations. Entering the service of the Empress was not merely a job, it was an invitation into the very heart of the Heian sun, a place where every gesture was scrutinized and every word carried the weight of one's entire lineage. As Murasaki moved through the corridors of the palace, she found herself in a landscape defined by the concept of miyabi, or courtly refinement. The walls were made of paper and wood, and the boundaries between people were often nothing more than portable silk screens, yet the social barriers were as impenetrable as stone. She was no longer just a writer or a widow. She was now a participant in a grand living tapestry. The Empress Shoshi was young, barely in her late teens, and her court was being carefully curated by her father to be the most intellectual and sophisticated circle in the land. Michinaga knew that to secure his daughter's influence over the emperor, he needed more than just political maneuvers. He needed the most brilliant minds of the age to surround her, turning her quarters into a salon of such cultural brilliance that the emperor would find it impossible to stay away. This was a time of intense rivalry between two rival courts. On one side was the court of Shoshi, and on the other that of Empress Teishi. It was a competition fought with poems, with the colors of one's sleeves, and with the quality of the paper upon which one's calligraphy was brushed. Teishi's court was already legendary for its wit and charm, led by the formidable Sei Shonagon, the author of the Pillow Book. Murasaki entered this environment as a newcomer, a woman who was perhaps a bit older and more reserved than her peers, and her diary reveals a fascination with the sheer vanity and brilliance of it all. She describes the ladies-in-waiting as they moved through the halls, their many-layered robes creating a sea of shifting colors, pale greens, deep purples, and the softest pinks of cherry blossoms, all overlapping in a deliberate display of wealth and taste. Yet beneath this shimmering surface, Murasaki felt a profound sense of isolation. In her diary, she often writes of the social pressures that weighed upon her. She was perceived by some as being cold or overly intellectual, a woman who hid her knowledge of the Chinese classics, a domain usually reserved for men, to avoid being seen as pretentious. She speaks of the loneliness that can exist even in a crowded room, the feeling of being an observer rather than a participant. She would sit behind her screen, watching the flicker of the oil lamps and the shadows they cast upon the sliding doors, feeling like a stranger in a world she was simultaneously chronicling for the ages. The brilliance of the court was often exhausting, a relentless performance where one had to be perpetually poised, perpetually clever, and perpetually aware of one's rank. The physical environment of the palace served to heighten this sense of both beauty and confinement. The Heian Palace was a series of interconnected pavilions, joined by covered walkways that looked out over meticulously raked gravel paths and gardens designed to mirror the natural world in its most idealized form. In the winter, the ladies would huddle over charcoal brazier, their fingers chilled as they practiced their handwriting. In the summer, they would seek the slightest breeze through the open lattices, the sound of the cicadas providing a constant, shimmering backdrop to their whispers. Murasaki's observations were keen and often unsparing. She saw the way the younger ladies would gossip and preen, and she saw the way the older officials would maneuver for even a scrap of imperial favor. She writes of the white radiance of the moon over the palace roofs and how it seemed to expose the emptiness of their pursuits. To Murasaki, the court was a stage, and while she played her part with grace, her mind was always elsewhere, perhaps dwelling on the characters of her novel or reflecting on the fleeting nature of all things. This sense of no-aware, the pathos of things, permeated her daily life. She saw the beauty in a falling petal or the dew on a morning glory, but she also saw the inevitable decay that followed. The silk robes would eventually fade, the powerful ministers would eventually fall from grace, and the laughter in the corridors would one day fall silent. This awareness made her a master of capturing the hidden loneliness behind the silk screens. There is a famous passage in her diary where she describes a night of celebration, a time of music and wine and dancing. While others were lost in the revelry, Murasaki found herself looking at the reflection of the torches in the garden pond, thinking about how transitory the moment was. She felt the weight of her own history and the expectations placed upon a woman of her standing. There was a constant tension between her private self, the scholar and the dreamer, and her public self, the dutiful lady-in-waiting. This tension is what gives her writing such incredible depth. She wasn't just recording events, she was recording the emotional weather of an entire era. As the years passed in Shoshi's service, Murasaki became a trusted confidant to the Empress. She was asked to teach the young sovereign the works of the Chinese poets in secret, away from the prying eyes of those who thought such learning was unwomanly. This shared secret created a bond between them, a quiet sanctuary of intellect in a world often dominated by surface appearances. Through these private lessons, Murasaki saw the vulnerability of the Empress, a young woman caught in the middle of her father's ambitions and the rigid traditions of the throne. It was in these quiet moments, away from the glare of the court festivities, that Murasaki found the threads she would weave into the life of her shining prince, Genji. The social atmosphere was one of constant subtle warfare. A misplaced word or an unfashionable color combination could lead to a loss of face that was difficult to recover from. Murasaki describes the anxiety of preparing for a major ceremony, the hours spent choosing the right fans and the right scents, knowing that every detail would be judged by 1,000 eyes. And yet, she also captures the genuine moments of connection, the shared laughter over a funny story, the collective hushed breath when a particularly beautiful poem was recited, and the deep, silent understanding that existed between women who were all living within the same gilded cage. She observed the way the moonlight would spill across the veranda, illuminating the dust motes in the air, and she saw how even the most powerful men in the kingdom were subject to the same longings and fears as the common people. This universality is what makes her observations so timeless. She looked past the gold leaf and the brocade to see the human heart beating underneath. The palace was a place of high drama, but it was also a place of mundane routines, the morning greetings, the preparation of tea, the endless copying of sutras. Murasaki found the extraordinary in the ordinary, the eternal in the ephemeral. Behind the screens, where the light was dim and the air was still, Murasaki Shikibu continued to write. The world of the court provided her with a never-ending stream of inspiration, a gallery of faces and voices that she would transform into the characters of her masterpiece. The vanity, the brilliance, the loneliness, and the longing, All of it was being distilled into her ink, creating a legacy that would outshine the very empresses she served. As she sat in the quiet hours of the night, the only sound the scratching of her brush against the paper, she was building a world that would endure long after the Heian palace had crumbled into dust. Legend says that the true spark of creation ignited far from the crowded corridors of the capital during a pilgrimage to the Ishiyama-dera temple on the shores of Lake Biwa. It was the night of the full moon in the 8th month, a time when the air begins to carry the first crisp promise of autumn, and the water reflects the silver light like a polished mirror. As Murasaki gazed out at the moon, hanging heavy over the dark ripples of the lake, the image of an exiled prince, wandering a lonely shore under that same celestial light, crystallized in her mind. In that moment of profound stillness, the character of Genji was born, not as a mere figure of fiction, but as a living soul, weary of the world yet radiating a beauty that seemed to belong to another realm. She was so moved by the vision that she supposedly reached for the nearest available surface, the back of a Buddhist sutra scroll, and began to write the first lines of what would become the Suma and Akashi chapters. Whether this story is literal truth or a poetic myth created by later generations, it captures the essence of how her masterpiece felt to those who first encountered it, as something divine, pulled from the ether and anchored to the earth by the steady movement of a brush. The physical act of bringing this world to life was a slow and meditative ritual. There were no printing presses, no mass-produced pages, only the tactile intimacy of silk and paper. Murasaki would sit before her low writing desk, her posture straight and her movements deliberate as she prepared her materials. She would take a stick of solid ink, made from the soot of burnt pine and scented with a hint of musk, and grind it against a stone well, mixing it with a few drops of water until it reached the perfect lustrous consistency. The scent of the ink itself was a catalyst for memory, a fragrance that signaled the beginning of her journey into the imaginary. With a brush made of fine animal hair, she would trace the elegant, flowing lines of the Kana script, the women's hand, which allowed for a lyrical, emotional expression that the rigid Chinese characters of official state business could never capture. Each stroke was a breath, each sentence a thread woven into a tapestry of unparalleled complexity. As she finished a section, the long strips of paper were carefully glued together and attached to a wooden roller, creating a scroll that could be unfurled slowly, revealing the story bit by bit, just as a garden reveals its secrets to a wandering guest. As the chapters were completed, they did not sit in a drawer gathering dust. They became the lifeblood of the court. In an era without novels as we know them, Murasaki's work was a sensation that travelled from screen to screen and room to room. The process of reading was often a communal experience, a shared immersion into a world that felt more real than the one outside the palace walls. A lady-in-waiting might sit in the centre of a circle of her peers, the scroll held delicately in her hands, her voice rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence as she read the descriptions of Genji's lavender robes or the heartbreaking laments of the women he left behind. Others would lean in close, their silk sleeves overlapping like the petals of a flower, listening with held breath to every turn of the plot. They would discuss the characters as if they were mutual acquaintances, debating the prince's intentions or weeping over the fate of the Lady Fujitsubo. The scrolls were borrowed and copied, passed from hand to hand until the ink began to fade and the paper grew soft with use, creating a shared emotional vocabulary among the women of the Empress's inner circle. The reception of the Shining Prince was nothing short of a cultural phenomenon. To the ladies of the Heian Court, Genji was the embodiment of the aesthetic ideal of miyabi, or courtly refinement. He was a man who could compose a poem on a snapped twig of plum blossom as easily as he could play the flute with a haunting, ethereal grace. Yet, what made him truly captivating was not his perfection, but his vulnerability. Murasaki had created a hero who was deeply flawed, a man driven by longings he could not fully satisfy and haunted by the consequences of his own passions. Her peers saw in Genji a reflection of the men they knew, but elevated to a level of poetic brilliance that made the mundane struggles of court life seem part of a grander, more melancholic design. They called him the Shining Prince because he seemed to cast a light on everything he touched, yet that light always carried with it a shadow, a reminder that beauty is fleeting, and that even the most radiant life must eventually fade. As the story grew longer and the scrolls multiplied, the boundaries between Murasaki's life and her fiction began to blur. She was no longer just a lady-in-waiting, she was the architect of a universe. The Empress Shoshi herself became a devoted reader, often asking for the next installment with an eagerness that bypassed the usual formalities of their rank. There is a quiet power in the image of these two women, the powerful Empress and the observant widow, sitting together in the dim light of an oil lamp, lost in the adventures of a prince who lived only in the ink and the imagination. Through her writing, Murasaki provided a sanctuary for the women of the court, a place where their own silent joys and sorrows were given a voice and a name. The scratching of her brush continued through the deep watches of the night, filling the silence of the palace with the echoes of a world that would continue to breathe long after the last scroll was rolled tight and the lamps were extinguished for the final time. At the heart of this sprawling masterpiece stands the figure of Hikaru Genji, the Shining Prince, a man whose grace and beauty are said to be so luminous that they cast a glow upon everything he touches. Born the son of an emperor, but relegated to commoner status to protect him from the shifting tides of political intrigue, Genji moves through the world of the Heian Court like a celestial being momentarily trapped in a mortal frame. He is a man defined by his pursuit, not of power or conquest, but of the sublime. To Genji, beauty is a sacred pursuit, found in the curve of a plum branch against a winter sky, the scent of a rare incense blended with meticulous care, or the haunting melody of a flute played under a pale moon. His life is a rhythmic dance of aesthetic appreciation, where every gesture and every word is weighted with the profound sensitivity of one who understands that life is as fleeting as the morning dew. In the early chapters of the tale, we find Genji and his companions gathered on a rainy night, a setting that invites soft voices and shared secrets. This famous episode, known as the Conversation on the Broom Tree, serves as a quiet meditation on the nature of love and the search for the ideal woman. As the rain drums gently against the shutters, the young men debate the qualities of the women they have known, categorizing them by rank and temperament. They speak of the middle-rank women, those who possess a quiet, resilient charm, and the difficulty of finding a partner who embodies the perfect balance of intelligence, grace, and devotion. Genji listens, his heart restless, for he seeks something more than a mere companion. He seeks a mirror for his own soul, a connection that transcends the rigid expectations of their society. This rainy night conversation sets the stage for his many wanderings, a long and winding journey through the hearts of many, each encounter a petal falling from a cherry tree, beautiful in its brief moment of descent. One of the most breathtaking moments in the narrative occurs during the Festival of the Red Leaves, a time when the world is draped in the fiery hues of autumn. The air is crisp, and the mountains are ablaze with crimson and gold, reflecting the bittersweet nature of the season. In the presence of the emperor, Genji performs a ceremonial dance, his movements so fluid and his presence so radiant that those watching are moved to tears. He is the very embodiment of the season, vibrant, exquisite, and yet shadowed by the inevitable approach of winter. As he dances, the falling maple leaves seem to follow the rhythm of his sleeves, creating a scene of such profound beauty that it feels almost unbearable. This festival is more than a celebration. It is a manifestation of the Heian ideal of mono no aware, the deep, moving pathos of things. It is the realization that the very things that bring us the most joy are the things that are destined to fade, and it is in this fading that their true value is found. As Genji moves through the seasons, his life becomes a complex web of relationships, each one reflecting a different facet of his character and his longing. He is drawn to women who possess a certain melancholy, a shared understanding of the world's fragility. There is the refined and elegant Fujitsubo, whom he loves with a forbidden intensity because she reminds him of the mother he lost too young. There is the tragic and mysterious Lady Rokujo, whose repressed passion and jealousy manifest in ways that haunt the court. And then there is the young Murasaki, whom Genji discovers in a remote temple, a girl of such promise and natural grace that he takes it upon himself to raise her, molding her into his vision of the perfect woman. Their relationship is one of the most enduring and complicated threads of the story, a bond that evolves from guardianship into a deep, soulful partnership that anchors Genji's wandering heart. In this world, nature is never merely a backdrop. It is a living, breathing participant in the lives of the characters. The change of seasons dictates the rhythm of their days and the color of their moods. When the spring mists roll in over the hills, the characters feel a sense of renewal and a softening of the heart. When the summer cicadas buzz in the heat of the afternoon, there is a feeling of languor and suppressed desire. The winter snows bring a sense of isolation and quiet reflection as the world outside is hushed and the glow of the charcoal braziers provides the only warmth. Murasaki Shikibu uses these natural shifts to externalize the internal landscapes of her characters. A sudden gust of wind might mirror a moment of anxiety, while the sight of a single flowering vine climbing a crumbling wall might represent a flicker of hope in a time of sorrow. The garden becomes a sanctuary, a place where the boundaries between the human spirit and the natural world are blurred, and where one can find a momentary peace amidst the complexities of court life. Genji's search for the ideal woman is, in many ways, a search for a sense of belonging in a world that feels increasingly transient. He moves from one wooden veranda to another, leaving behind poems written on delicate paper, scented with the fragrance of his arrival. Each relationship is a chapter in his education of the heart, teaching him the nuances of grief, the weight of responsibility, and the enduring power of memory. He learns that love is rarely simple, and that the pursuit of beauty often comes with a price. Yet he continues his quest, driven by a profound appreciation for the small, fleeting moments that make life worth living. The way the moonlight catches the ripples on a pond, the sound of a silk robe rustling against the floor, or the quiet companionship of someone who understands the unspoken thoughts behind a sigh. Throughout these adventures, the Shining Prince remains a figure of contradictions. He is both a gentleman of the highest order and a man capable of great selfishness. He is deeply spiritual, yet constantly distracted by the pleasures of the world. It is this humanity that makes him so compelling, even 1,000 years later. He is not a static hero of legend, but a man who grows, suffers, and eventually comes to terms with the limitations of his own brilliance. As the years pass, the vibrant colors of his youth begin to soften into the more muted tones of maturity. The festivals continue, the seasons turn, and the court remains a place of whispered rumors and hidden glances, but Genji himself begins to look inward, seeking a stillness that the world of the palace cannot provide. The narrative flows like a slow-moving river, meandering through the lives of dozens of characters, each one drawn with a precision that makes them feel entirely real. We see the world through their eyes, the anxiety of a young woman entering the palace for the first time, the weariness of an aging official, the quiet dignity of a monk who has turned his back on the world. Murasaki Shikibu's genius lies in her ability to capture the universal in the particular, to find the eternal truths of human nature within the highly specific rituals of the Heian Court. As we follow Genji through the gardens and the galleries, we are reminded that while the fashions and the customs may change, the longings of the human heart remain the same. The search for beauty, the desire for connection, and the quiet acceptance of time's passing are themes that resonate across the centuries, whispered to us through the soft rustle of Genji's silk sleeves and the steady, rhythmic scratching of Murasaki's brush in the deep, quiet hours of the night. As we linger in the moonlit galleries of the Heian Court, we begin to sense a quiet melancholy drifting through the air like the scent of plum blossoms in the rain. This is the essence of mono no aware, a phrase that defies simple translation, but one that Murasaki Shikibu weaves into every fibre of her narrative. It is the pathos of things, the deep, bittersweet awareness of the ephemeral nature of all beauty. To the people of Genji's world, a flower is not precious simply because it is lovely, but because it will soon wither and fall. The dawn is cherished because it marks the end of a secret meeting, and the autumn moon is celebrated because its clarity reminds us of the coming winter chill. This philosophical heartbeat pulses more strongly as the story of the Shining Prince unfolds, moving away from the bright, youthful dalliances of the early chapters and toward a more contemplative landscape. We see Genji, once the golden child of the sun, find himself caught in the shifting winds of political fortune. The death of his father, the old emperor, leaves him vulnerable to the machinations of those who have long envied his brilliance. Eventually, the weight of his indiscretions and the changing tides of power lead to a self-imposed exile. He leaves behind the perfumed halls of Kyoto for the lonely, windswept shores of Suma. At Suma, the sensory world changes. The refined music of the court is replaced by the mournful sound of the wind through the pine trees and the rhythmic, lonely crashing of the waves against the sand. Here, in a simple hut, far from the luxury he has known since birth, Genji undergoes a spiritual turning point. The silk robes are replaced by simpler garments, and the constant hum of courtly gossip is silenced by the vastness of the sea. He spends his days painting and playing the koto, his music blending with the cries of the plovers. It is a time of profound isolation, yet it is also a time of refinement. In the silence of Suma, Genji learns that even the most exalted life is subject to the whims of fate, and that the attachments we cling to are as fleeting as the foam upon the water. As the years pass and Genji eventually returns to the capital to regain his former glory, he is no longer the same man. He has looked into the void of loss and recognized the fragility of his own existence. The narrative reflects this deepening maturity as Murasaki turns her brush toward the inevitable aging of the characters we have come to know so intimately. We watch as the vibrant women of the court grow older, their beauty fading like the colors of a late-season kimono. We see the once invincible prince begin to feel the weight of his years, his thoughts turning more frequently to the Buddhist path and the promise of a world beyond this one. The Buddhist influence on the tale becomes a steady, grounding presence, reminding the listener that all things are interconnected, and that suffering arises from our desperate desire to hold on to what must naturally pass away. There is a sense of karmic consequence that ripples through the lives of the characters, a realization that every action, no matter how small or hidden, leaves a trace upon the soul. The characters often speak of their desire to take the tonsure, to retire from the world and enter a monastery or a nunnery, seeking a peace that the fleeting pleasures of the court can never truly provide. This tension between the pull of earthly love and the call of spiritual liberation creates a haunting resonance in the later chapters. We feel this most poignantly in the passing of Murasaki, Genji's greatest love and the woman he raised to be his perfect companion. Her death is not a sudden, dramatic event, but a slow, lingering departure that allows the reader to experience the full weight of Genji's grief. As he watches her fade, the world seems to lose its luster. The gardens they tended together, the poems they exchanged, and the quiet moments of shared understanding all become ghosts of a past that can never be reclaimed. Through Genji's eyes, we see the true meaning of mono no aware, the agonizing beauty of a love that was perfect precisely because it was not eternal. Even the seasonal descriptions begin to take on a more somber tone. The snow that falls on the bamboo groves is no longer just a backdrop for a poetic gathering. It is a shroud that covers the earth, a reminder of the stillness that awaits us all. The characters spend more time in prayer, the scent of incense replacing the heavy perfumes of their youth. There is a quiet dignity in this transition, a measured acceptance of the cycle of life and death that governs the natural world. Murasaki Shikibu does not shy away from the reality of loss, but she cushions it in a language so beautiful that the sadness becomes a form of solace. As we listen to the story, we are invited to reflect on our own attachments, the things we hold dear, and the way time moves through our lives like a river. The world of the Shining Prince is a world of shadows and light, where every joy is tempered by the knowledge of its end. Yet there is a profound comfort in this honesty. By acknowledging the transience of life, the characters find a deeper way to appreciate the present moment. A single poem, a shared glance, or the sound of a flute in the distance becomes an entire world unto itself, precious because it is unique and unrepeatable. The narrative meanders through these reflections, never hurrying, allowing the reader to sit with the characters in their quiet rooms as the evening shadows lengthen. We see the next generation beginning to take their place on the stage, repeating the same patterns of longing and heartbreak, unaware that they too are part of a long, unfolding tapestry. The cycle continues. The cherry blossoms bloom and fall, the moon waxes and wanes, and the stories we tell ourselves are the only things that remain, whispered from one heart to another across the vast expanse of time. In these moments of quiet contemplation, the boundaries between the 11th century and our own time begin to blur. We recognize the same anxieties, the same hopes, and the same quiet grief in the hearts of these ancient courtiers. We understand the pull of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Murasaki's genius lies in her ability to capture the universal human experience within the specific, rarefied atmosphere of the Heian Court, making the distant world of Genji feel as close as a dream we once had. As the night deepens and the air grows still, we find ourselves drifting with the characters toward a place of stillness. The bustling activity of the early chapters has given way to a profound, meditative calm. The lessons of Suma, the sorrow of loss, and the beauty of the passing seasons all converge into a single steady heartbeat. We are reminded that to live is to experience the pathos of things, and to find beauty in the very fact that nothing lasts forever. The silk sleeves rustle one last time, the brush is laid aside, and we are left with the soft, enduring glow of a world that, though long gone, still speaks to us in the silence. And so, as the fire in the brazier burns low and the stars move slowly across the sky, we lean into the quiet. The story of Genji is not just a story of a prince, but a map of the human soul as it navigates the waters of change. It teaches us that while the physical world is a place of shadows, the light of awareness, the recognition of mono no aware, can illuminate even the darkest night. We breathe in the scent of aged wood and cold air, feeling the weight of the centuries settle around us like a heavy, comfortable blanket, preparing us for the transition from the world of the waking into the world of dreams. As the light of the shining prince eventually fades from the page, the narrative does not simply end, but rather shifts its gaze toward the misty, river-drenched landscape of Uji, a place where the air is thick with dampness, and the sound of rushing water provides a constant, low-frequency hum to the lives of those left behind. These final chapters, often called the Uji chapters, carry a different weight than the youthful brilliance of Genji's early years. They are permeated by a profound sense of late autumn chill, where the colors are more muted and the stakes feel both smaller and more desperately human. Without Genji at the center to hold the world together with his charisma, we find his descendants struggling to find their way through a world that feels increasingly fragmented, and the prose itself seems to slow down, lingering on the way the moon reflects in the swirling eddies of the river, or the way a screen door rattles in a sudden gust of wind. In these chapters, Murasaki Shikibu explores the lives of those living on the margins of the capital, characters who are perhaps more relatable to us in their uncertainty and their quiet grief. There is a sense of searching for something that has been lost, a yearning for a golden age that has slipped through the fingers of time like dry sand. The atmosphere is one of deep, contemplative stillness, inviting us to settle deeper into our own rest as we contemplate the cyclical nature of all things. The grand palaces of the city are replaced by humble villas and the scent of damp moss, and the drama becomes one of internal landscapes, of hearts trying to find peace in a world that refuses to stay still. It is here that Murasaki truly masters the art of the unspoken. The long pauses between words, the glances shared across a dimly lit room, and the heavy, beautiful realization that even the most vibrant life must eventually yield to the quiet of the evening. As Murasaki reached the conclusion of her great work, her own life began to mirror the withdrawal she wrote about so eloquently. The vibrant, often exhausting world of the imperial court, with its endless ceremonies, its whispered rivalries, and its rigid protocols, began to lose its luster for her. We can imagine her looking out from her veranda, watching the seasons change for the 100th time, and feeling a deep, soul-level fatigue that no amount of courtly favor could soothe. It is believed that in her later years she followed the path of many women of her station and took the tonsure, becoming a lay nun and retreating into a life of quiet prayer and reflection. The bustling corridors of the palace were replaced by the soft glow of butter lamps and the rhythmic chanting of sutras, a transition from the world of the external to the world of the internal. The exact details of her departure from this world remain a mystery, veiled by the mists of over 1,000 years. There are no definitive records of her final days, no grand monuments erected at the time of her passing. Instead, she seems to have simply faded into the background of history, much like the characters in her stories who find solace in the shadows. Some say she spent her final years at the Ishiyama-dera temple, the very place where legend says she first began writing her masterpiece, looking out over the moonlit waters of Lake Biwa and finding a sense of completion in the landscape that had first inspired her. This lack of a clear ending feels strangely appropriate for a woman who spent her life chronicling the ephemeral nature of existence. She became, in the end, a part of the very mono-no-aware she so beautifully described. Her final resting place is said to be a modest grave in Kyoto, situated near the tomb of the poet Ono no Takamura, a quiet spot where the wind rustles through the trees and the city's noise feels a world away. There is a profound peace in this anonymity, a sense that the author herself has stepped aside to let her work speak for her, and speak it did, through centuries that were often far from peaceful. As the Heian period gave way to eras of samurai rule and devastating civil wars, the delicate paper scrolls of Murasaki's tale were placed in grave peril, The Onin War in the 15th century saw much of Kyoto reduced to ash, and yet, through some combination of luck and the deep reverence of those who held them, the stories of the Shining Prince survived. We can picture a scholar or a lady-in-waiting, perhaps in the midst of a city under siege, carefully wrapping the hand-painted scrolls in silk and tucking them into a sturdy wooden chest, carrying them through the smoke-filled streets to a place of safety in the mountains. These scrolls were more than just entertainment. They were a lifeline to a world of beauty and refinement that seemed to be slipping away. They were copied and recopied by hand, each scribe adding their own breath and energy to the lines, ensuring that the voice of a woman from the 11th century would continue to whisper into the ears of readers hundreds of years later. The preservation of these texts through such turbulent times is a testament to the power of the human spirit to cherish what is beautiful, even when the world around it is falling into shadow. As we lie here in the safety of the present, we can feel a connection to those nameless guardians of the past, those who stayed awake by candlelight to ensure that the tale of Genji would not be lost to the flames. The words have travelled a vast distance to reach us, crossing oceans and centuries, carrying with them the cool air of the Uji River and the scent of incense from a vanished court. There is a comfort in this continuity, a feeling that we are part of a long, unbroken chain of dreamers who have found solace in Murasaki's world. The weight of the history behind these words acts as a gentle anchor, holding us steady as we drift toward the shores of sleep. The ink on the page, once wet and dark in the dim light of a Heian lamp, has long since dried, but the emotions it captured remain as vivid and as haunting as ever. We can see the silhouettes of the characters moving behind the paper screens of our imagination, the rustle of their silk robes a soft, soothing sound that mimics the rhythm of our own breathing. The world of the Uji chapters, with its mist and its melancholy, is a perfect bridge to the world of dreams, a place where the boundaries between the real and the imagined begin to blur, and where the quiet beauty of the evening is all that remains. As we prepare to leave Murasaki behind and move toward the final legacy of her work, we take one last look at the river at Uji. The water flows on, indifferent to the passage of time, carrying with it the fallen leaves of autumn and the reflections of the stars. It is a slow, steady movement that invites us to let go of the day's worries and surrender to the current. The story is nearly told. The scrolls are being rolled up and placed back into their lacquered boxes, and the lamps are being dimmed one by one. In the deepening silence, we find a sense of profound gratitude for the woman who sat by the lake so long ago and decided to capture the light of the moon on paper, creating a sanctuary of words that continues to offer us rest, even now, in the quiet of the night. And as those scrolls are tucked away, we find that the story of the Shining Prince does not truly end with the final brushstroke of Murasaki Shikibu. Instead, it flows outward like the ripples on the surface of Lake Biwa, expanding across the centuries until it touches the very edges of our modern world. For over 1,000 years, this single narrative has acted as the foundation upon which the house of Japanese aesthetics was built, providing the colors, the scents, and the emotional vocabulary for an entire civilization. The poets of the Middle Ages looked to Murasaki's descriptions of the autumn wind to understand the true nature of longing, and the painters of the Edo period studied the way she described the falling of a single petal to capture the fleeting beauty of the floating world. It is often said that Murasaki Shikibu did more than just tell a story. She invented a new way for humans to look at themselves. Scholars today recognize her masterpiece as the world's first true psychological novel, a work that reached deep into the hidden corners of the human heart long before the concept of the subconscious was ever named. She understood that our lives are not merely a series of external events,
but a complex tapestry of memories, secret desires, and the quiet conversations we have with ourselves when the rest of the world is asleep. Through Genji's triumphs and his many sorrows, she showed us that every person carries an inner world as vast and as shadowed as the Heian night, and that by exploring these shadows, we might find a common thread of humanity that binds us all together across the ages. As the centuries drifted by like cherry blossoms on a slow-moving stream, the tale of Genji transformed into something more than a book. It became a visual language. We see its influence in the delicate gold-leaf screens of the Muromachi era, where the prince's carriage waits beneath a weeping willow, and in the vibrant woodblock prints that brought the elegance of the court to the common people in the bustling streets of old Tokyo. Even now, in our age of flickering screens and digital dreams, the story continues to reinvent itself, appearing in the frames of intricate manga, the sweeping scores of modern cinema, and the minimalist prose of contemporary writers who still find inspiration in Murasaki's ancient wisdom. The characters she created have become eternal archetypes, ghosts of beauty that haunt the Japanese imagination with a grace that never seems to fade. There is a profound comfort in knowing that the emotions we feel tonight, the quiet melancholy of an ending day, the soft hope for tomorrow, and the appreciation for a moment of stillness, are the very same emotions that Murasaki captured in her inkstone 10 centuries ago. The world has changed in ways she could never have imagined. The wooden palaces have been replaced by towers of glass and steel, and the dim oil lamps have given way to the neon glow of the city. Yet the human heart remains exactly as she described it. We still seek connection in the darkness. We still find ourselves moved by the sight of the moon rising over a distant hill, and we still yearn for a sense of belonging in a world that is always in flux. As we drift closer to the shores of sleep, we can imagine the Heian moon as a bridge spanning the vast distance between Murasaki's time and our own. It is the same pale silver disk that illuminated her paper screens as she wrote of the prince's exile, the same light that reflected in the dew on the morning glory flowers she loved so well. When we look up at that moon, we are sharing a gaze with every person who has ever lived and loved, a lineage of dreamers stretching back through the mists of time. The moonlight does not judge. It does not hurry. It simply bathes the world in a soft, forgiving glow, smoothing away the sharp edges of our worries and inviting us to rest. The legacy of the Lady Murasaki is not found in dusty libraries or cold stone monuments. It lives in the way we perceive the beauty in a falling leaf or the sadness in a fading sunset. It is a legacy of sensitivity, of no aware. The gentle realization that because things are temporary, they are infinitely precious. This perspective allows us to cherish the present moment without clinging to it, to appreciate the warmth of our blankets and the steady rhythm of our breath as we prepare to let go of the day. The story of the Shining Prince has taught us that even in a world of constant change, there is a timeless elegance to be found in the simple act of being. And so, we let the images of the Heian Court fade into the softest shades of grey and indigo. The scent of sandalwood incense lingers for a moment longer before drifting away into the cool night air. The silk robes are folded, the fans are closed, and the heavy curtains of the bedchamber are drawn tight against the world outside. There is nothing left to do now but surrender to the pull of the tide, to let the weight of the centuries carry us down into a deep and restorative slumber. The ink has dried on the page, the story is complete, and the moonlight continues to watch over us, steady and serene. In this sanctuary of words, we find a peace that is both ancient and new.
We are part of a long, beautiful tradition of finding rest in the stories of the past, of letting the wisdom of those who came before us light the way through the dark. As you sink deeper into your pillows, feel the stillness of the palace at midnight settling over your own room. The air is calm, the house is quiet, and the stars are distant diamonds in a velvet sky. You are safe in the embrace of the night, protected by the same silence that inspired a genius to write her masterpiece so long ago. Sleep now, as the world of the shining prince dissolves into the landscape of your dreams. Let the gentle flow of Murasaki's prose become the rhythm of your resting mind, a slow, steady pulse that guides you away from the shore of wakefulness. The moon is high, the shadows are long, and the night is full of a quiet, enduring grace. Everything is as it should be. Everything is at rest, and the story will be here, waiting in the silver light, whenever you choose to return. As the final echoes of the Heian world drift away, the silence becomes a soft blanket, tucking you in and shielding you from the noise of the waking world. There is no more time, no more distance, only the peaceful, eternal present. The journey through the scrolls is over, and the path to sleep is open and clear. Follow it down into the darkness, where the dreams are as vivid as silk and as gentle as the moonlight on the water. Rest,